The cosmic fear response failed when humans laughed at their most terrifying creatures. Part 1. The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never lost a war. This was not because they had the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons. Many species had tried to match them in firepower, and many species had failed. The Conquered won because they understood something fundamental about living things. They understood fear. Ambassador Vox stood on the observation deck of the dread carrier Eternal Nightmare and watched the blue planet rotate slowly in the darkness of space. Earth, the natives called it, a small world orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The conquered scouts had been watching it for 3 of the planet's years, and now the time had come to add it to the empire. Vox was a species that resembled tall, thin insects with too many joints in their limbs. His compound eyes reflected the planet's oceans as he reviewed the final reports. The humans were a young species, barely capable of leaving their own world. They had primitive weapons, basic technology, and no understanding of what waited for them in the dark between stars. They would be easy. "Begin the broadcast," Vox ordered. Behind him, the technicians activated the transmission array. The process was elegant, the result of thousands of years of refinement. The conquered signals could override any communication system, insert themselves into any network, and display their message on any device capable of showing images. Across the human world, every screen would soon display the same images. Every phone, every television, every computer would show them the menagerie. Vox allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had performed this ritual many times before. He knew exactly how it would unfold. First, the confusion as humans realized their devices had been taken over. Then the dawning horror as they saw what was being displayed. Then the panic, spreading like fire through dry grass. Then the collapse. It always happened the same way. The menagerie was the Conquered's greatest weapon. Over thousands of years, they had collected creatures from across the galaxy, each one designed by evolution or engineering to trigger the fear response in carbon-based life forms. These were not just scary things. These were nightmares given flesh, horrors that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the ancient, animal parts of the brain that screamed at living things to run, to hide, to surrender. The Conquered had tested these creatures on hundreds of species. They had refined their appearance, their movements, their sounds. Everything about the menagerie was designed to maximum effect. Nothing was accidental. Every shadow, every angle, every horrible detail had been crafted to create the possible terror. The first creature in the broadcast was It stood 3 meters tall on 8 segmented legs, its body covered in coarse black hair that seemed to absorb light. Where a face should have been, there was only smooth, pale flesh with 2 hollow eye sockets that went deep into its skull, suggesting depths that could never be filled. The moved wrong, its joints bending in directions that made observers feel sick. It had no mouth, but it didn't need one. Species had died of terror just watching recordings of it. The second creature was the shriek worm. It looked like a massive centipede made of muscle and teeth, but its true weapon was its voice. The shriek worm produced ultrasonic frequencies that resonated with the fear centers of most known brains. Hearing it, even through speakers, caused panic attacks, heart failures, and mass hysteria. Entire cities had torn themselves apart trying to escape that sound. The third and most terrible creature was the Void Stalker. It was difficult to look at directly because the brain refused to process what it was seeing. It seemed to be made of shadows and wrong angles, with too many limbs and too many mouths and eyes that appeared in different places each time you blinked. The Void Stalker represented the fear of the unknown, the terror of things that should not exist. 3 civilizations had surrendered to the Conquered after seeing just 10 seconds of Void Stalker footage. Vox watched the transmission data with satisfaction. The broadcast was reaching every corner of the planet. Billions of humans were now seeing the menagerie for the first time. According to the standard timeline, mass panic would begin within minutes. Governments would collapse within hours. By this time tomorrow, the humans would be begging for mercy, ready to accept any terms the conquered offered. He waited and waited. After 1 hour, his communications officer approached with a confused expression. "Ambassador, we are receiving transmissions from the planet." "Surrender requests already." Vox felt a small pulse of disappointment. He had hoped the humans would last a little longer. That was faster than expected. "No, Ambassador, they are not surrender requests." The officer's mandibles clicked nervously. "They appear to be expressions of amusement." Vox turned sharply. "Explain." The officer activated a display showing samples of human communications from across the planet. Vox did not understand the human languages, but the translation software worked quickly to convert the messages into something he could comprehend. "LOL, that spider thing looks like cousin," one message read. "Anyone else think the sound those worm things make would be fire with some bass added," said another. "The shadow monster is giving me serious Stranger Things vibes. Kind of derivative, honestly," complained a third. Vox stared at the screen. The translation software must be malfunctioning. These could not be real responses to the menagerie. "Check the translation algorithms," he ordered. "There must be an error." "I have checked them 3 times, Ambassador. The translations are accurate." More messages flooded in. Someone had already created an image combining with a piece of human headwear called a top hat, and the caption. Someone else had set the shriek worm's call to music. A human child had drawn a picture of the Void Stalker and given it a smile and the name, Mr. Wiggles. On a platform called social media, humans were sharing the images with comments that ranged from amused to annoyed. Many complained that the broadcast had interrupted their regular programming. Others were discussing which fictional monsters the menagerie creatures most resembled. A group of humans who called themselves horror fans were engaged in detailed criticism of the creatures' designs, pointing out what they considered flaws and missed opportunities. "The spider thing would be scarier with mandibles," one comment read. "Zero creativity in the execution. Seen this 100 times." "Why does the shadow monster have so many mouths? Pick a design and commit to it," another complained. "These aliens need to watch more Earth horror movies. We've been doing this forever and we're much better at it," boasted a third. "This is impossible," Vox whispered. "The fear response is universal. It is biological. They cannot simply choose not to be afraid." But the evidence was undeniable. Across the planet, humans were not running. They were not hiding. They were not collapsing into chaos and despair. They were laughing. They were making jokes. They were turning the most terrifying creatures in the known galaxy into entertainment. Within 3 hours, merchandise was being sold. Someone had created a song using the shriek worm's cry as the primary instrument, and it was spreading rapidly across human communication networks. Artists were comparing the Void Stalker unfavorably to their own fictional monsters and pointing out design flaws. Parents were using images of to decorate their children's birthday parties. Vox felt something he had not felt in centuries of service to the conquered. He felt confused. He felt worried. He felt, though he would never admit it, a small amount of fear. "Ambassador," his science officer said carefully, "I believe we may have made an error in our assessment of this species." "What kind of error?" "We assumed humans were like other carbon-based life forms. We assumed they experienced fear in the standard way, but our initial observations were incomplete." The officer pulled up new data on the display. "Ambassador, I recommend we conduct additional research before proceeding. The humans are not reacting normally. Something is different about them." Vox looked at the planet again. It still rotated peacefully below them, its cities bright with light, its people going about their lives as if the dread fleet was not hovering in their orbit. As if the most terrifying creatures in the galaxy had not just been broadcast into every home. "Very well," he said slowly. "Delay the ground phase. I want to understand what we are dealing with." He watched a human video that had already accumulated millions of views. In it, a young human was reacting to the menagerie broadcast with exaggerated expressions of mock fear, then dissolving into laughter. The comments below were filled with human symbols that indicated amusement. For the first time in 12,000 years, the conquered psychological warfare division had encountered something they did not understand. For the first time in his career, Ambassador Vox was forced to admit that he did not know what to do next. And far below, on the surface of that strange blue world, the humans continued to laugh at things that had brought empires to their knees. Part 2. 3 days had passed since the broadcast, and Ambassador Vox had not slept. This was unusual for a who required at least 6 hours of rest to maintain mental function. But every time he closed his compound eyes, he saw humans laughing at the Void Stalker. He saw children wearing costumes. He heard the shriek worm's terrible cry transformed into what humans called a dance track. The research team had worked without stopping since the failed broadcast. Vox summoned them to the main conference chamber of the Eternal Nightmare and demanded answers. "Explain to me," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "how a species with standard biological fear responses can simply ignore the menagerie." Senior researcher, a member of a species that resembled floating jellyfish, pulsed with nervous light before speaking. "Ambassador, the answer is complicated. May I share what we have discovered?" "That is why you are here." Activated the holographic display in the center of the room. Images of humans appeared, along with charts and data streams that Vox did not fully understand. "First," the researcher began, "we must acknowledge that our initial assessment was not wrong. Humans do possess the standard fear response. Their brains produce the same chemicals, trigger the same ancient survival instincts, and react to threats in ways we would expect from any prey-descendant species. When a human sees a predator, their body prepares to fight or flee. This is normal. Then why did they not flee from the menagerie? Because, Ambassador, we failed to account for something unique to human psychology. Change the display to show various images from human culture. Humans have developed the ability to experience fear as entertainment. They do not merely tolerate fear. They seek it out. They enjoy it. The display showed humans entering dark buildings filled with actors dressed as monsters. It showed crowds of humans watching violent and frightening stories on screens while eating snacks. It showed humans jumping from high places attached to elastic ropes, riding vehicles designed to create the physical sensation of danger, and engaging in countless other activities that seemed designed to trigger fear responses. "They call this fun," said. Vox leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "They deliberately frighten themselves, for amusement." "Yes, and they have been doing this for their entire recorded history. Their earliest stories involve monsters, ghosts, and beings from the darkness. They have an entire category of storytelling called horror that is dedicated to creating fear. They celebrate a yearly festival where they dress as frightening creatures and decorate their homes with images of death and monsters." Another researcher, a being made of crystalline structures, added more information. "We have also discovered that humans expose their young to frightening stories as part of normal development. They read tales of witches who eat children, wolves that devour grandmothers, and monsters that hide in dark places. They believe this helps their children learn to process and manage fear." "They train their children to handle fear?" Vox asked in disbelief. "From a very early age. By the time humans reach maturity, they have already experienced thousands of fictional frightening scenarios. They have been chased by imaginary monsters, threatened by pretend villains, and faced simulated death countless times. Fear is not new to them. It is familiar." "This is insane." "Perhaps, but it has also made them resistant to our methods. Brought up new images, these ones showing creatures from Earth. There is another factor we did not consider. The human's home planet is remarkably hostile. The display showed a creature that looked like a serpent with massive jaws and teeth that could crush bone. This was followed by something called a spider, which looked disturbingly similar to the. Then came images of parasites that lived inside other organisms, fish that dwelled in complete darkness with transparent skulls and glowing lures, and countless other organisms that seemed designed by a cruel god to cause suffering. There is a region on their planet called Australia, continued, where nearly everything is venomous, poisonous, or otherwise deadly. Humans live there anyway. They seem to find it amusing. The display showed more Earth creatures, box jellyfish with tentacles that could stop a heart, tiny frogs with skin so toxic that touching them meant death, insects that could strip the flesh from bones in minutes, plants that caused permanent blindness, snakes that could sense body heat and strike in total darkness. Their oceans contain pressure fish that look like nightmares, their jungles hide diseases we do not fully understand, and their mountains are covered in ice that can freeze a being solid in minutes, the researcher said. Earth is not a gentle world. It has been trying to kill its inhabitants since life first appeared there. Their own world is filled with creatures that would cause distress in most species, continued. They have coexisted with predators throughout their evolution. They have survived ice ages, supervolcanoes, and multiple extinction events. Their ancestors were hunted, poisoned, and terrorized by their environment for millions of years. You are saying they are already accustomed to fear. I am saying, Ambassador, that fear is their constant companion. They have learned to live with it, to manage it, and eventually to control it. When they saw the menagerie, they did not see something new and terrifying. They saw something familiar, something they had faced in different forms their entire lives. Vox was silent for a long moment. The implications of this were disturbing. The Conquered's entire military doctrine was based on the principle that fear was the ultimate weapon. Every species could be controlled through terror. Every species would surrender when faced with their deepest nightmares given physical form. But the humans had already faced their nightmares. They had faced them every night for thousands of years in their stories and dreams. They had built an entire culture around confronting, examining, and laughing at the things that frightened them. There is something else, added hesitantly. Tell me. The humans have a psychological defense mechanism that we have not encountered in other species. When faced with fear that they cannot escape or fight, they often respond with laughter. They make jokes. They find absurdity. It appears to be a method of processing threat without becoming paralyzed by it. They laugh because they are afraid. Sometimes, but more often, they laugh because they have decided not to let fear control them. They use humor as a weapon against terror. It robs the frightening thing of its power. Vox thought about the videos he had watched. The humans were not laughing because they were too stupid to understand the danger. They were not laughing because they were unaware of what the menagerie could do. They were laughing because laughter was their shield. It was how they had survived a hostile planet and how they faced an uncertain universe. What do you recommend? He asked finally. I recommend we do not proceed with the standard conquest protocol. The menagerie will not work against this species. If we attempt a ground invasion, I suspect we will encounter similar problems. Humans are very good at adapting to threats and finding ways to turn fear into motivation rather than paralysis. Are you suggesting we cannot conquer them? His body pulsed with uncomfortable colors. I am suggesting, Ambassador, that conquering them through fear is impossible. They have already conquered their own fear. They did it long before we arrived. Vox dismissed the research team and sat alone in the dark conference chamber. For the first time in his career, he understood that the Conquered had encountered something genuinely new. Not just a species that resisted fear, but a species that had made fear into an ally. A species that invited terror into their homes for entertainment, and taught their children to laugh at monsters. He pulled up more data from the planet below. Humans were already treating the menagerie broadcast as the start of a new story. Some were speculating about who had sent the creatures and why. Others were creating artwork inspired by them. A few enterprising individuals were selling products featuring the Shriek Worm and Void Stalker. The most disturbing development was what humans called fan fiction. These were stories written by ordinary people, imagining further adventures involving the menagerie creatures. Some of these stories depicted the creatures as villains to be defeated. Others portrayed them as misunderstood beings in need of friendship. A significant number involved romantic relationships between humans and the monsters, which Vox found deeply confusing. They had taken the Conquered's greatest psychological weapons and turned them into characters in their imagination games. Vox composed a message to the Conquered High Council, something he had never done in all his years as ambassador. He requested guidance. He admitted uncertainty. He told them what he had learned about the humans and their strange relationship with fear. Then he waited for a response, watching the blue planet rotate below, wondering what other surprises this impossible species might have in store. Part 3. The response from the Conquered High Council arrived 2 weeks after Vox sent his report. It was short and unhelpful. "Proceed as you see fit," it said. "Report outcomes." The Council had ruled for 12,000 years by avoiding direct responsibility for failures. They would let Vox handle this situation, and if it went poorly, they would blame him. He was considering his options when his communications officer rushed onto the observation deck with wild eyes. "Ambassador, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. They want to talk." Vox felt his heart skip a beat. A surrender. "No, Ambassador, they say they want to make a deal." The human delegation arrived on the Eternal Nightmare 3 days later. Vox had expected soldiers, diplomats, or perhaps terrified leaders begging for mercy. What he got was a group of 5 humans in casual clothing, carrying bags full of strange devices and what appeared to be legal documents. The leader of the delegation was a woman named Sarah. She was small by human standards, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to find everything amusing. She walked through the corridors of the dread carrier as if she were touring a museum, pointing out interesting features to her colleagues and occasionally taking pictures with her personal communication device. "This is incredible," she said when she entered the conference chamber. "The architecture is amazing, very organic. Is it grown or constructed?" Vox stared at her. "You are not afraid." "Should I be?" Sarah smiled. "We're here to do business, Ambassador. Fear is bad for negotiations." "Do you understand where you are? Do you understand what we could do to you?" "Sure, you could kill us, eat us, torture us, or whatever else scary alien empires do in the movies. But you won't, because you need something from us." She sat down at the conference table without being invited and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "You need to understand why your fear broadcast didn't work." Vox remained standing, trying to maintain some sense of authority. "We already understand. Your species has an unusual relationship with fear. That's part of it, but here's what your researchers probably didn't figure out. It's not just that we're used to fear. It's that we're bored with the kinds of fear you're selling." Sarah opened her folder and spread out images on the table. "Look, I work in entertainment. Specifically, I work in horror entertainment. My company produces scary movies, haunted attractions, and video games designed to frighten people. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I can tell you exactly what went wrong with your broadcast." She pointed to an image of "This is basically a big spider. We have big spiders. We've been scared of spiders for millions of years. At this point, spider monsters are what we call a classic. They still work on some people, but for most of us, it's nostalgia. Oh, a spider monster, how nice, reminds me of my childhood." She moved to the Shriek Worm. "This one has a great sound design, I'll give you that. The ultrasonic frequencies are clever, but we've been manipulating fear through sound since we invented drums. Your worm's cry would make an excellent soundtrack for a horror film, which is exactly what happened. Someone on Earth has already released 3 remixes. Finally, she tapped the image of the Void Stalker. And this one is just trying too hard. Too many mouths, too many limbs, too much, I am incomprehensible cosmic horror. We invented cosmic horror. A guy named wrote stories about exactly this kind of thing 100 years ago. Your Void Stalker looks like it was designed by someone who read those stories and missed the point. Vox felt deeply confused. You are criticizing our nightmares. I'm giving you professional feedback. Your menagerie is outdated. It relies on tricks we've already seen. You've been conquering species that haven't had centuries of horror fiction to prepare them. Humans have been scaring ourselves for fun since we lived in caves and told stories around fires. We've already imagined everything you can throw at us. Then what do you want? Sarah's smile widened. I want to make a deal. My company wants exclusive licensing rights to the menagerie. We want to use your creatures in our films, our theme parks, our video games. We'll pay you for this. A lot. You want to purchase our weapons. We want to turn your weapons into entertainment, which, let's be honest, is what we were already doing for free. This way, you get something out of it. One of her colleagues, a tall man with glasses, pulled out a tablet and began showing financial projections. Our estimates show that the menagerie could generate significant revenue across multiple entertainment sectors. Film rights alone could be worth billions in human currency. Then there are merchandising opportunities, theme park attractions, video game adaptations, and something we call Halloween costumes, which is a surprisingly large market. Another colleague, a woman with bright red hair, was sketching on a piece of paper. I'm already seeing possibilities for the Void Stalker design. With some modifications, it could be the villain in at least 3 film franchises. The work's great as is, very classic monster energy. The Shriek Worm needs work on its visual design, but that audio is genuinely impressive. Our sound designers are very excited. Vox watched them work, their enthusiasm seemingly genuine. They were not afraid of the creatures. They were professionally interested in them. They saw potential where the conquered saw weapons. Vox sat down slowly. His understanding of the situation was crumbling. The humans were not here to surrender. They were not here to negotiate peace terms. They were here to offer him money for the right to use the conquered's instruments of psychological warfare in their amusement industries. We could destroy your planet, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. You could try, Sarah agreed. But why would you? We're not a threat to you. We don't want your territory or your resources. We just want your monsters. And in exchange, you get access to something you've never had before. What is that? A species that isn't afraid of you. She leaned forward. Ambassador, your entire empire is built on fear. Every species you've conquered is still terrified of you. They obey because they're scared, and scared people are always looking for a chance to escape. But we're not scared. We think your monsters are neat. We want to be your friends, your business partners, your colleagues. Imagine having an ally that actually wants to work with you instead of one that's just waiting for a chance to run away. Vox was silent for a long time. He thought about the 12,000 years of conquered rule. He thought about the hundreds of conquered species, all living in fear, all secretly hopping for liberation. He thought about the constant vigilance required to maintain an empire built on terror. And he thought about the humans, who had turned his greatest weapons into merchandise, who had laughed at the Void Stalker and danced to the Shriek Worm's cry, who sat in his conference room talking about business deals as if the Dread Fleet was not capable of ending their civilization. I will need to discuss this with the High Council, he said finally. Take your time, we're not going anywhere. Sarah stood and gathered her documents. One more thing, Ambassador. My team would love a tour of the menagerie before we go. We have some ideas for how to make the creatures even scarier for human audiences, if you're interested. She left the conference room with her colleagues. all of them chatting excitedly about production values and practical effects and merchandising opportunities. Vox sat alone in the darkness, contemplating the end of an era. The conquered had ruled through fear for 12,000 years, but fear, he now understood, was a tool with limitations. It only worked on species that could be frightened. The humans could not be frightened. They had already frightened themselves over and over again until fear became just another flavor of entertainment. They had taken terror and turned it into a game, a story, a product to be packaged and sold. The conquered had two choices. They could try to conquer the humans through conventional warfare, fighting a species that had spent its entire history learning how to face threats with courage and humor. Or they could accept Sarah's offer and gain something the conquered had never had, a willing partner instead of a conquered subject. 6 months later, the first conquered human joint venture opened on Earth. It was called Terror Beyond the Stars, and it featured live appearances by actual, carefully trained to provide maximum entertainment value. The Shriek Worms had their own exhibit with special soundproofing and premium audio equipment. The Void Stalkers appeared in a new human film that broke box office records across the planet. Humans lined up for hours to experience fear that had brought empires to their knees. They screamed, they laughed, they bought merchandise. Children posed for pictures with and adults debated which creatures were the scariest in forums across the internet. The conquered discovered something unexpected. Partnering with humans was more profitable than conquering them would have been. The entertainment revenue flowed into conquered accounts, and the humans kept asking for more. They wanted scarier creatures, more terrifying experiences, bigger and better nightmares. They were never satisfied, always hungry for new fears to consume. And throughout the galaxy, other conquered species watched in amazement as the humans did something no one had ever done before. They made friends with the conquered, not through strength or fear, but through the one thing humans understood better than any species in the known universe. They made friends by laughing at the darkness and inviting it to laugh with them. Ambassador Vox, now serving as the Conquered's first entertainment liaison to Earth, sometimes stood on the observation deck of his ship and watched the humans below. They were still the same strange species that had laughed at the menagerie. They still made jokes about things that should terrify them. They still turned every horror into a story, every nightmare into a game. And Vox, who had served the Conquered for centuries through fear and conquest, found that he was no longer disturbed by this. He had learned something from the humans, something that 12,000 years of rule had never taught the Conquered. Fear was powerful, but laughter was stronger, and friendship, willing and freely given, was the most powerful thing of all.